So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the School of Facilitation webinar, which is all about the reluctant salesperson. Today's conversation is all about having great conversations with your clients. And I wanted to share with you my screen because I wanted to show you just a couple of slides to get things going. Three things I'm aiming to cover this morning. One is we as a team are going to identify the core qualities of a great client conversation. And then I'm going to share a really simple 6-step process that I guess has evolved for me over the 20 in sales. And then I'm just going to call out 3 key elements of that conversation, which can help all of us when we're having conversations with our clients. So, quick question to you all, and you can either put it in the chat box. When someone says to you, you've got to go and sell, what is your reaction? What does that mean to you when you've got to go and have a conversation with a client and you feel like you've got to go and sell? So just drop in the chat box your thoughts. I want to run away. How do I make it less of a sell? Thanks, Des. Teresa, yeah, think the label, I feel embarrassed, a confidence issue, fear of rejection. If it's something I'm really passionate about, I relish it. If not, it's not something, and I don't know, I'm not so excited. Thanks, Sheila. So the whole concept of selling, it's really fascinating. So I've run so many exercises with people who really clearly identify with being salesperson, and yet none of them call themselves salespersons. So whenever you meet someone and that you ask them what their job is, and if they are in sales, they never say I am in sales. They go, I'm in commercial, I'm in business development, I grow a business, but no one ever identifies with selling. And I think it's just got a really weird connotation for a lot of us, and it seems to be either a dirty word or it actually is mixed up with a lot of emotions. If you look back at what we've all just said in the chat box, there's like the fear of rejection, there's an emotion, there's a sort of ickiness that goes with it. Like Teresa says, it's the elephant in the room. And sometimes it's like cold calling, or especially for us Brits, you know, the double glazing salesperson, or the estate agent, or the car salesperson. And when we're having to think about selling for ourselves and our own businesses and what we do, and the fact that we're all really passionate about our subjects, it can then suddenly feel a bit awkward because you've got to sell yourself, sell your idea, and then you've got to get over the issue emotionally of selling. So having some frameworks to help you through this can be really, really useful, and maybe start to detach some of the emotion. So here is the first exercise. Does everyone have some pen and paper or something they can write onto? Yep. To help themselves? So the question is this. Think of a time when you have gone and bought something, and this is a high value item. So think of something you've gone and bought, and it could be as high value as a house, a car, it could be a computer, it could be that pair of shoes you've been aspiring to, or a handbag, or a piece of jewelry, or just something that's really important to you. And on your sheet of paper, write down what happened as you were buying and you went to buy the item. So if you had a face-to-face interaction with someone in a shop, what was that interaction like? What was being said? What was being done? What was the environment like where you went maybe to shop? If this was and now for some of us it's an online experience, what was the online experience like? What was happening for you? So it's less about what you bought, it's more about the experience of buying. So just write down some thoughts now, what it was like to buy it, and what were some of the things that was happening as you were buying. So it would be really great to hear from whoever wants to go first. And if you want to just share like the big elements that were coming up for you that were what makes a good buying experience in your opinion. Which breakout room would like to go?
We can go to.
Thanks, Sheila.
So the themes we had were trust, listening and understanding, feeling positive around the transaction, so the sort of the brain and the heart, and feeling valued, and having kind of getting people hooked on things. So we've got listing the things it does. So it would be like making sure that the things are relevant, they add value for that particular person, and specifically then coming on to your unique selling point.
What do you mean by unique selling point?
So what makes you, so if you're selling something that someone else is selling, what makes it different to get it from you?
Okay, great, thank you. Other group, what was it you would like to, what was it you noticed? And it can be the same and different, so please far away.
So some similarities around, having a good listen, like being listened to as a buyer. I mean, that conversation really tightly like tailored. No two sales conversations are the same. Feeling like as a buyer, your best interests are at heart rather than what they want from you. So you have the choice to kind of make the choice that's in your best interest. Something about empathy. So with the listening and then taking action or as a salesperson on what you're hearing, and adding value that way. And then finally something about being well informed or having the opportunity to do research and have your questions answered.
Okay. So I'm just writing to go. I probably should learn to use the whiteboard on here. That's just probably one step too far for a Monday right now. So we've got trust. There's this piece around that sense of being listened to, and the person that you're talking with being a good listener. That you have actually been understood, and someone else said, you know, my needs have been understood. They've taken time to work out what it is I really want versus them just selling a product to me. I liked, Sheila, the way your team described it, in that you create a hook on things. So you said list it. I'm going to put some sales language into this only because it's easier. So what the salesperson might have done was they've listed features of the product. So I think some of you were buying cars, so they would have listed it's the red car you wanted, with black seats, with the surround sound stereo, with the automatic locking after 5 seconds. But they then they're listing the features that you want, but they're also then sharing the benefits to you in their language. So they probably then say, because you told me earlier that was really important to you, because you have a small screaming child and you want to put the music on really loudly so you don't have to listen to them. Something like that. The fact that they've added value to you as the client, so they've probably demonstrated that through the words and then the offer they've given you or suggested or recommended. There's definitely this piece around time, I've heard. So there was time to reflect on, is this the purchase I want? And the no pressure to buy. So what you notice with some people, they will make decisions to buy really super quickly, and then other people need time and they need to go away, they need to reflect. And you'll know for yourself which person you are. Are you the person who needs time to think, or are you sort of in the moment, you'll just go, yeah, I'll buy it? And the same is true for our clients, you'll notice. There is definitely this piece around empathy. And I love that, feeling positive in both the brain and the heart. And you'll notice that often the empathy piece comes through the person who's helping you make your purchase as the salesperson. So you start to recognize that it's not just what you're doing, it's how you're doing it that is super important. So when you think about how do you build trust, that isn't just something, that's not like a transactional thing, that's often through the interactions of you and the other person. So what's really interesting is with that exercise, you start to think about, well, if these are the qualities that I seek when I go shopping and I've just gone buying a car, a house, a bag, a computer, we can take those qualities and totally translate them into our world of when we're working with our clients. And to give you a sense of proportion, a sense, I don't know, what other people say, I think I've probably done a good 100 workshops in sales before, all over the world, and the words and the phrases that you've come up with is what salespeople come up with as well when they want to have a good conversation with their customers. And they really do acknowledge you need to be asking great questions, you need to be able to really listen, you need to understand what the customer wants. So we talk about understanding our customers' needs. You need to know your product really well and be able to lay out options for your customer, your client. Customers love options. I don't want to just be told, right, this is it. This is the only box I have available to you in blue with yellow dots. They want to know that there's a variation, but you've got to give the variation within the parameters that you can work within. And then the other big thing that I think is super important is you and how you show up. So that whole piece around the empathy and the trust and you flexing your style. So good news, you've definitely come up with the ideas and the answers that other people would have done as well. I'm just going to go back to sharing my screen, and I want to share with you a really simple conversational process that I have used time and time again and coached in various different guises. And this works for people in big corporate selling jobs. This works when you're working with charities, NGOs. It works for us having a client conversation, because this is exactly what I do in terms of a flow. So I'm hoping everyone can see the screen. And so what you do is you start up at preparation. So this is before you have a conversation. So I don't know if I can do this. So what would be really interesting is if you can flick your microphones on, what would you be thinking about preparing before you have a client conversation? What would be some of the key things?
You would be researching the client. If you're doing a pitch or you're buying something, you need to put effort into that as part of know your customer. Or...
Yeah, so know your customer. Thank you, David. Who else?
And with that, I'd add, think about what their needs and maybe sort of challenges and objections might be.
Yeah, their needs, challenges and objections, always useful.
I might look into if I know anyone else who works there, or if I know someone who works there, to just get a bit more under the skin about what it's really like.
Yeah.
But that also helps when you get to the connect bit, because if you know someone that's there already, oh, I know so-and-so, and then...
Yes. Yeah, you can establish an element of rapport that way.
Yeah.
Well. Great, thank you, Sheila. Who else? Anyone else know what they prep before they have a call, whether that's a face-to-face meeting or it could just be that introductory phone call as well?
I'd try and get a sense of if they've had any engagement with me before. So, you know, have they downloaded anything from our website? Have they been to one of our events previously? Things like that.
Yeah, nice. And what's the benefit of doing that, Joe?
Well, it means that I can refer to the fact that they've had some engagement with us. And it also means that I know that they have some level of understanding of what we do as a company. So I don't need to, I mean, I'd say that it's partly to help with the conversation, and it's also a bit around actually qualifying them as a genuine prospect, if they've shown levels of engagement already.
Great. Anything else people think or know they do before they have that first phone or a phone call or a meeting face to face? Teresa in our washing machine.
Oh, can you hear me? I've just typed it because I wasn't sure if you could hear me or not.
Sorry, and I'm not looking at the type, so I should.
Yes, I said.
Sorry, darling.
Yeah, I'd research things like the business environment and read maybe that annual report and gather some stats and facts around that business.
Great. All of this is really, really useful at a very macro level. I'm going to encourage you to start sort of drilling down a bit more. So the one thing that I've got better at doing, and I really encourage all salespeople to do, whether it's a client meeting or a big customer, is define that meeting objective. What is it you want to achieve in that phone call, that 1 hour meeting? And often we sort of generalize, we go, oh, I'd really like to win this piece of business, or I'd really like to have this person as a client. Well, that's really wishy-washy. So what is it you can achieve in that conversation? And I appreciate you might be in different cycles of conversations with your clients as well. So it might be someone you've got a long-term relationship with. That still means you have an objective for the meeting. So if I'm thinking about my clients and I'm having, say someone's come to me and said, Kirsty, I would like to have a conversation with you about what you're doing because I see we have a need. I often write straight back into the email, it'd be really great to know what you want to achieve from our time together. I then start to set the objective in my head of what I want to achieve, which if it's a first time call, my intention is often to either get a request for me to create a proposal or a request for a second phone call. So I make it really small and like a logical, tiny little bite-sized chunk of something that I can achieve. Because the smaller the objective is and more achievable it is, the easier it's going to be to get. And I know that sounds so obvious, but sometimes we sort of go too big too soon. And something I've also learned is if you try and write an objective that the client's going to say yes to your proposal in the first meeting, the likelihood is that's not going to happen.
If you can't meet the client need,
say that again, David. If you can't meet the client,
you have to be, at that point, you have to be able to say back to the client, I'm sorry, we can't do that because it's outside of what we do or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's also important to be able to be clear what's in and out of your scope and your remit. So in preparation, the first thing I'll always do is create an objective, because that then gives me intention. And if I have a clear intention for the meeting, I am more likely to follow that path. Because if you don't know where you want to go, you'll go whichever route you want to go, and you'll always get something, but it won't be tangible and concrete. The next thing I think about, sorry, Joe, you got a question?
Yeah. It was a comment, actually. I hope that's all right.
Go for it, yeah.
One of the things that I always try to do with those initial usually phone calls, is establish whether the client is a genuine client, a genuine prospect, as opposed to someone who's interested in having a conversation. And there's nothing wrong with having conversations, but it's not the best use of our time as sort of salespeople. So I've started being quite bold in talking about asking them about budget on those initial calls. If I sense that there's a brief. If there's not a brief, then I don't, because it would just be a weird question. Yeah. But I don't like, because one of the things that you said would be an objective would be to get a request for a proposal. But if they've got no intention of actually buying and they're just being polite, or they're just interested in what we would propose because they then feel they could deliver it themselves, I feel I need to know that before I invest the time it takes to actually create the proposal.
I'm with you. And I think you're having, so the next thing I was going to say was you'd really want to create is some really good quality open questions. So you start to collect those questions together, and it sounds like, Joe, some of those questions are few around like a real positive intent. Is there something you want to do? And then if you do get that sense that someone has positive intent, it is asking the question around budget. And that's not always the one that people want to ask, but it's a really useful question. So what's your budget for this project? Now, they might answer straight off, or they might dance and sort of give you vague. And if they give you vague, my now reply that I've learned is that's absolutely fine. It makes it harder for me to create a really great proposal for you, but I will give you a couple of options, and you can then tell me, we can have a conversation, a further conversation as to, is this the right thing for you? So in preparation, there's objective, there's your questions, and they're open questions. You can do a whole other conversation on open questions. There is something around a really, especially if it's a phone call, a very simple verbal presentation or a verbal set of recommendations that you'd want. Or if you're going face to face, you might have a very short and very simple slide deck, or if you're the people who like to use storyboards, but there's just something that can help bring to life your ideas. What this isn't is War and Peace about you or your business. So this is you bringing solutions to the client. Okay, so that's the presentation. And Arabella, you also said about objections. You might have a little think like, what could be some of their objections, so that I'm prepared emotionally for them when they come through. And we're going to whiz through the other steps just to bring these to life, because prep is often the biggest one. Connect is when you come into the meeting, onto the phone call, and there's some really simple elements in there around introducing yourself, building rapport fast, asking your questions. Sheila's gone now, and Joe said it as well, you know, if this is someone who has got a connection with my business or I've met before, you would use that as your lead. This is your time to be reading the other person, and we're all coaches and trainers and facilitators, so our skills at reading other people I would expect to be pretty reasonable. So you'd know whether you're working with someone who's a high introvert thinker or a big extrovert expressive person, and you can adjust your communication style to the person who you are connecting with. The third step in this conversation framework is a summary. Now, in Connect, you're asking questions to understand what it is the client needs. So all you're doing is questioning here. You're not presenting any solutions. So you're just asking them really clear questions. And before you start presenting your ideas, you're going to summarize. So what you do is you summarize what they've just said to you using their words. And it's a really short step. It might be 2 minutes long, but it's a really useful step because it demonstrates something that you all said you liked, which is being listened to and being understood. So you're demonstrating back to the client, I've listened to everything you've told me and I've understood, because I'm using your words, your phraseology, and I'm replying back to you. And if you can see the other person, often you'll see that they're nodding because you're using their language and what you've just told them. The benefit of summarizing as well is it creates a natural pause point in the conversation. So it gives you time to catch up with everything that's going on around you. And it also gives you time to just check in that original meeting objective. Is it still relevant now before I present any solutions? Because something could change in that connecting step of understanding. And if it has changed, you just need to be verbally agile and be prepared to dance on your feet and maybe just shift your perspective ever so slightly. So that's summarize. Then notice it's only in step 4 that you finally present your ideas. So what happens in the old world of sales, a lot of people used to think they'd meet a salesperson or they go in and talk to their client and they go straight to the present mode. You know, computer gets opened, PowerPoint gets put up onto the screen. Whereas that's not the case. You want to be creating and establish the connections first. So in this present phase, this is where you are probably recommending some ideas, some solutions. Even if this is conversation number 1 and it's on the telephone, intuitively you will have some ideas in your head as to what you could be doing for this customer, for this client. You don't have to sell your soul at this point and give them everything, but give them a taste of what it is you can do. If you're doing something face to face, you might even give them a mini experience of, I don't know, an exercise that you do or a piece of thinking that you might do with them, and just walk them through it to get them excited. This is your opportunity. Someone used the language of getting hooked. This is where you create your hooks. This is also where you layer your language, another technique, with their words, and saying things like, earlier you said you're really interested in bringing innovation and innovative culture into your business. These are the ways, the 4 ways we recommend you bring innovation into a business, for example. So you bring their language into this presentation all the time.
Sounds like you're selling one of my workshops, Kirsty.
Oh, mate. Thanks, Joe. I could do it for you. Then I'm thinking, you do this presentation and then you get this point where you need to move the conversation on from what the ideas you've presented to almost like the next steps and agreeing. Now, old world sales, this would have been the close, and this would fill a lot of people full of dread and sort of, oh my God, I've got to close the deal. So here's my suggestion. To move from present to agree, you ask one really simple question. And the question is, What do you think? And what this does is it invites your client to share their opinions and share their thoughts, the good, the bad, the indifferent, the ugly. And they will come to you and probably tell you what they like. They'll also maybe tell you some of those objections that we have already thought about in our heads. But what it does is it's not you going, so do you want to buy this idea? You know, that really incongruent phrase, you know, just no one says that. So the question is, what do you think? Or what are your thoughts on this? Or how are you feeling about these ideas right now? And I promise you, it'll just open up another conversation, so it becomes a two-way dialogue again in the agree step. And what you will find is you will naturally start to come up with some actions of where to go next. And yeah, there might be some objections that you need to overcome. And another time I'm happy to give you the techniques I use for overcoming objections. So it's about asking great questions again, because often an objection arises because they've either we've misunderstood their needs, they've misunderstood our words, or we just genuinely haven't shown them something that they can utilize at that point. So it's not a no, it's just a not now until you give me a different perspective. So by the time you leave your conversation or you leave the meeting at agree, that's where you want some clear actions that you're agreeing on. You put some timing against it. And then the execute phase takes you back to your office, to your desk, where you might then start doing some more creative work for them in terms of, you know, that proposal piece, and or going back with some refinements to your original proposal. And that's where the circle comes in. So you go back into preparation, because if you think about it, these are iterative. Relationships with our clients aren't one-off interactions. They're iterative and they continue. So you could always use this process. One thing to think about as well in all of this is you. So notice earlier when we were talking about like what we liked or disliked about selling, you know, the whole fear or worry or rejection or being inauthentic. So we have to always consider in this process us and how we're showing up and how we do things. So this is the sort of really simple process that I use every time that I sell or have a conversation with a client, and noticing as well how I show up in that conversation in relation to that client is super important as well. So just going to pause there right now. What questions do you have that have come up as we've gone through that conversation?
I have one. Mm-hmm. Sometimes when we deal with a business or a client, the client hasn't fully formed the idea of why they're looking for help. Mm-hmm. And that can be a problem within the organisation because the leadership team is less committed.
Yeah.
So how you then end up helping the client form through the earlier stages of this process to form the state, to get into a state where they can work effectively with you.
Yeah. So that's, for me, would be spending a lot of time in Connect. So asking questions, connecting with them, understanding their business, even down to who are the key decision makers here, back to the budget question, understanding needs. And it might be you then just use this process, David, really simply to summarize what they keep telling you and just checking in with them. You know, you go backwards and forwards between connect and summarize to begin with. And you might then start making some suggestions in that present phase as into what is potentially possible. I think it's then back to what Joe said though, is are they using you to have some great conversations to refine their thinking, or are they actually going to engage you at some point in the work? So I think you've got to, in your own head, establish like a timeline. Is it 1, 2, 3 conversations you're prepared to have before you sort of say, okay, now this is us moving into consultancy work for you, as I'm helping you evolve your thinking, because that's still consultancy for some of us. You know, you're helping the client grow their thinking, and it's just us being able to say that. What other questions or noticings even have people got? How similar is this process to what you do already?
It's similar to what I do, but what I think I notice about it is that there's a whole sort of feedback loop that goes on the sort of right hand side of the hexagon that you've got there. So like between connect, summarize, and present, I feel like you can do circles and circles and circles around that, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I don't mean that like a negative. I mean, one of the things that can be really, I love that question that you put out about what do you think. I'm definitely going to use that, because at the point where you say what do you think, what I find often happens is I then need to go right back to connect, to dig more into what their response is, and that's a good thing. It's sort of, it means the more we know the person, the better we can actually meet their needs.
Absolutely. And it's okay spending time in connect and summarize. It's okay to spend time asking them questions, and you'll sense it in a conversation that when, you know, they got the question fatigue probably, and you know when it's the right time to step into giving some ideas. But if you just open up a conversation and just go straight into giving solutions to an email they've sent you, you're just never going to win. You're never going to understand what it is they truly want, to be able to then match what you can offer them. Thanks, Joe. How about some of the rest of you? How does this look compared to what you do already? Stunned silence. Des, the phone contact objective is often just to land the meeting. The meeting then is partly about chemistry on top of all the technical and detailed content and proposal. Yeah, so Des, I think I have moved from doing a lot of face-to-face meetings to phone and Zoom contacts with my clients. So I've stopped thinking that my phone call is just about the, about that. And now he's saying, sorry, that comment was typed ages ago. Timing, Des, and technology. But the point being is, though, is how do you, like, actually timing is super important in all of this. So you can, start to think about how you manage time, because often our clients only give us an hour, maybe 90 minutes if you're super lucky. I think ever had a meeting past an hour, might even be 45 minutes, but that's a whole other conversation. So the three elements I wanted to call out today, and I promise you we could have gone in many different locations and areas of this as a conversational framework, is three things for you to maybe practice would be: get intentional with your meetings. So really think about what's the objective you want to achieve, and it's okay to be really granular. Practice summarizing what the customer is telling you and what the client is saying to you, and use the summary step as a launch into your ideas, recommendations, and solutions. Because you've just got by summarizing the customer's needs, you've got them into a really good state, because they're like, yeah, she's really listened to me and they've really understood what I've got to say. So that when you start to present solutions to them or recommendations or ideas, they're more likely to go, I understand how that fits my need. And then how to move to the next logical step in the conversation in terms of present to agree, practice, have a go at asking the question, what do you think? Or what are your ideas? Or what do you feel? Because then you're inviting the conversation to come back the other way. And that's where you then start to move to action. So I'm just going to stop sharing the slides and come back to you all. I'd be really interested to hear just your thoughts just on what we've spoken about this morning, and just one or two headlines just before the hour is up. So I've heard Joe already say he's going to take away the question, what do you think? How about the rest of you? You can either type it in or you're welcome to say it out loud.
I'm going to think more about the kind of qualities of the conversation. So remember what it's like to be a buyer before I go into potential selling conversation.
Cool. Thank you, Arabella. Who else? Joe, thank you. Des, helpful thinking builds and useful to challenge myself and drill deeper. Anyone else want to put in their thoughts before they?
Yeah, I will do. I think it's shown me the necessity to put more of an organised framework and timings about a process that perhaps in the past I've let flow organically.
Cool. Thank you, David. Anyone else? So, on the reluctant salesperson, my final thoughts of this, it can just be a conversation. You don't have to feel like you're selling. And if you look at what are the qualities of a really great salesperson, it's actually they're really good at building relationships and getting to know another person authentically and in a timely manner. So I just suggest have a play with that conversational framework I just shared, and have a play with the 3 key elements of creating an objective and an intent for your meeting. Practice summarizing what the customer is asking for or the client is asking for. And then finally, to move yourself from the present to the agree phase, ask the question, what is it? What do you think? But thank you everyone for being part of the conversation today. I really appreciate it, and look out for some more of these. I'll do some more sales webinars and we'll go a bit deeper into some of the processes in the forthcoming months.